She was just 26 years old, a fresh face in the small-town police department of Pacific Grove, California. Officer Linda Morgan had only been on the force for about 8 months when she vanished into the night, without a trace. It was a foggy September evening in 1977, the kind of night where the mist rolls off the ocean and blankets the cliffs in a ghostly silence. Linda had been assigned to routine patrol duty, something she'd done dozens of times before. Nothing about that night should have been different. But it was, because she never came back. The last anyone heard from her was a quick radio transmission at 10:47 p.m. She said she was pulling over near Driftwood Point, a rugged stretch of coastal road that hugged the cliffs above the Pacific. She didn't sound alarmed or panicked. Just routine. Normal. But then silence. No follow-up message. No response to dispatch. No sightings. Just gone. Her cruiser was found hours later, engine running, headlights still on, parked dangerously close to the edge of a steep drop-off. The driver's door was open, her flashlight was on the ground, and Linda was nowhere in sight. For years, theories swirled like the ever-present fog on that lonely road. Some thought she had slipped and fallen into the ocean. Others whispered about foul play, maybe she'd interrupted something she wasn't supposed to see. There were rumors of a secret affair, a stalker, even connections to a smuggling ring that used the cliffs as a drop point. But none of it ever led anywhere. No body. No evidence. Nothing. Just an open case file, a grieving family, and a town haunted by the mystery of the young female officer who simply vanished. Detectives worked the case for years. They re-interviewed witnesses, pulled phone records, even hired divers to search the waters below Driftwood Point. But the currents in that part of the Pacific were treacherous, and if she had gone over, there was little hope of finding her. By 1982, the case had gone cold. And by 1990, most people had stopped asking questions. Life moved on. But for Linda's younger sister, Rachel, the mystery never faded. She didn't believe Linda would have run away. And she didn't buy the accident theory either. Not with how carefully Linda followed protocol. Something had happened at night, something that had been buried. Rachel could feel it. Then, in the summer of 1990, 13 years after Linda vanished, everything changed. A group of amateur rock climbers, exploring the base of the cliff near Driftwood Point, stumbled on something strange. It was a rusted metal box, wedged between two rocks in a narrow crevice, barely visible above the waterline. At first, they thought it might be old equipment lost by a fisherman or diver. But when they forced it open, what they found stopped them cold. Inside was a plastic evidence bag, sealed and labeled. It contained a police badge, a cracked pair of aviator sunglasses, and a photograph. A photograph of Linda smiling, alive, standing next to a man no one could identify. The climbers handed the box over to authorities, and within hours, the case that had been dormant for over a decade was suddenly wide open again. The badge was confirmed as Linda's. The photo had never been seen before, not even by her family. And the man in it? He was wearing a sheriff's uniform, but not one from Pacific Grove. Investigators couldn't match the patch or badge to any known department. Suddenly, questions that had been buried for years came rushing to the surface. Who was the man? Where was the photo taken? And how had this box ended up at the bottom of a cliff? For the first time in 13 years, detectives had a lead, however mysterious. But it was Rachel who pushed hardest. She brought in private investigators, combed through archived radio logs, and found something odd. An unmarked vehicle had been logged near Linda's last known location just an hour before she disappeared. It wasn't a patrol car, and it wasn't accounted for in any official report. Could someone have followed her that night? Could they have intercepted her before she made her next call? As the investigation reopened, strange details began to surface. There were quiet whispers of misconduct in the department during the late 70s. Officers who had later been dismissed, evidence that had vanished from the evidence room, and a retired deputy who had moved out of state just weeks after Linda's disappearance. Even more unsettling, Rachel received an anonymous letter postmarked from Arizona. It contained only one sentence. "Your sister saw too much that night." Police traced the letter to a motel in Flagstaff, but by the time they got there, the sender was long gone. Inside the room, however, was something unexpected, a scrapbook. full of news clippings about missing persons, mostly women, across California from 1974 to 1981. And tucked between the pages was another photo of Linda. This time, she wasn't smiling. The case took a darker turn. Was Linda's disappearance part of something larger? Could there have been a pattern of abductions linked to law enforcement? As Rachel dug deeper, she uncovered the name of a former deputy who had served in a nearby county and had vanished himself in 1981, under suspicious circumstances. His badge matched the one in the photo, but his personnel file was missing, and no one at the old station would talk. As the summer wore on, more pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. An old fisherman came forward, claiming he'd seen flashing lights on the cliffside the night Linda vanished. But he'd never told anyone. He was drunk, he said, and didn't think anyone would believe him. Then, divers returned to the base of Driftwood Point, using updated sonar equipment to search for more clues. What they found sent chills through the team. About 40 feet underwater, nestled beneath the rocky outcrop, was the partial frame of an old sedan, buried in silt and tangled seaweed. It matched the make and model of a 1976 Dodge Diplomat, the same vehicle that had been listed in that old log as unmarked. Authorities prepared to recover the vehicle. If it had been there all this time, submerged just out of reach, what else could it be hiding? Was this the key to understanding what really happened to Officer Linda Morgan? And more importantly, why had someone tried so hard to keep it hidden? As word of the discovery spread, media outlets picked up the story. The public's interest was reignited, and Pacific Grove once again found itself in the spotlight. But this time, Rachel wasn't just a grieving sister, she was determined to get answers. She had already waited 13 years. And now, with each new clue uncovered from beneath the sea, she was closer than ever to the truth. But what the divers pulled from that car, sealed away for over a decade, was something no one expected. Something that would raise even more questions and cast suspicion on people once thought innocent. And that's where things get really strange. The recovery team worked carefully for hours, fighting rough surf and low visibility. The rusted-out Dodge Diplomat was more than just a corroded shell. It was a time capsule frozen beneath the waves. Once the car was lifted onto a platform and brought ashore, authorities quickly surrounded the scene. Cameras weren't allowed near it, but word spread fast. This was the same make and year as the unmarked car noted near Driftwood Point the night Linda vanished. The car had no plates, no VIN visible, and the interior had been ravaged by years underwater. But what caught everyone's attention wasn't the car itself, it was what they found inside. In the back seat, wedged between deteriorated seat cushions and crumbling metal, was a leather-bound notebook, water-damaged, but mostly intact. Wrapped in plastic, deliberately preserved. Someone had put it there to last. The pages inside were covered in handwriting, tight, neat lines written in black ink. It wasn't Linda's handwriting. Forensic analysts would later confirm that, but whoever wrote it had known her. The first few pages were simple logs, dates, times, observations. But soon the entries grew darker. Mentions of surveillance, warnings not to speak, and repeatedly, the same initials kept popping up. J.D. Rachel was at the sheriff's office when she got the call about the notebook. She wasn't allowed to read it in full, not yet, but one detective gave her a hint. "This goes deeper than your sister," he told her quietly. She was onto something. Something someone didn't want made public. That night, Rachel sat in her car outside Driftwood Point, looking out at the water where the car had been hidden for 13 years. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching. That someone had been waiting for the case to be forgotten forever. But now it was back in the light, and whoever was responsible might be getting nervous. The town of Pacific Grove had always been quiet, peaceful, a coastal gem tucked between cliffs and pine trees. But the more Rachel looked into it, the more she realized how many things had been quietly swept under the rug over the years. A missing teenager in 1975 never solved. A female hitchhiker found dead near the bluffs in 1978, case closed as accidental, but the autopsy was incomplete. And then there was the local sheriff at the time of Linda's disappearance, Harold Denton, a well-respected man with decades on the force. But when Rachel tried to get in touch with him, she learned he'd passed away in 1989. Heart attack. No family. His old records? Many were lost in a fire, a few years after he retired. Convenient, Rachel thought. Too convenient. She started looking into the initials JD and eventually stumbled on a name that hadn't come up before: James Denton. Sheriff Denton's younger brother. He'd worked in law enforcement too, but not in Pacific Grove. He was part of a special unit based out of Santa Cruz County in the mid-1970s. But after 1981, there were no more records. No resignation. No transfer. Just gone. Like Linda. Rachel dug deeper and discovered something odd. James Denton had once been investigated by Internal Affairs, though the details were sealed. Allegations of abuse of power, intimidation, and something about unauthorized surveillance. Rachel couldn't access the full report, but the pieces were starting to fit together. The photograph found in the metal box, the one of Linda and the unknown man, was shown around town again. An older woman who used to work at the Pacific Grove diner recognized him. He came in a few times with Harold Denton, she said. Kept to himself. Real quiet. Wore a badge, but not from around here. Rachel's heart pounded. This was the first real confirmation that Linda had interacted with James Denton before she vanished. The woman remembered one visit in particular. Linda was here too, she said. She looked tense, like she didn't want to be near him. They sat in a booth near the back. Argued a bit. Then she left alone. Why would Linda be meeting with someone like Denton? And why hadn't that interaction ever been mentioned in the original investigation? Rachel pulled the old case files again, scanning for any mention of Denton. Nothing. Not even a footnote. Someone had erased him from the official story. Meanwhile, detectives reviewing the notebook from the car were slowly piecing together a pattern. The writer, whoever they were, had been tracking interactions between several people. Linda was mentioned multiple times, often in connection with names or initials that didn't appear anywhere else in the case file. There was also repeated mention of something called OP7. It sounded like a code or an internal project. Every reference to OP7 was vague, but always tied to secrecy and warnings. If she talks, OP7 gets exposed, one line read. They'll do whatever it takes to bury this. Rachel brought this new information to a retired officer who had served with Linda. His name was Frank Albright, now living in Oregon. He remembered Linda well, sharp, kind, always asking the right questions. When Rachel mentioned OP7, Frank went quiet. He hesitated, then finally said, "It was an internal task unit. Off the books. Some of us thought it was meant to handle internal corruption. But it got twisted. Used for other things. Things not everyone knew about." He didn't elaborate, but Rachel could see he was scared. If Linda found out about OP7 and tried to report it, someone would have made sure she didn't. The deeper Rachel got, the more resistance she faced. Calls went unanswered. Emails bounced. Records suddenly got restricted. But she pressed on. She wasn't the same girl who had cried herself to sleep for weeks after her sister went missing. Now she was a woman with a mission, and nothing was going to stop her. One night, Rachel returned to the base of Driftwood Point, retracing the area where the metal box had been discovered. She brought a flashlight and a camera, determined to see if there was anything the divers missed. As the waves crashed in the distance and the wind howled through the rocks, she found something odd wedged behind a boulder. It was another piece of plastic, this time, a waterproof pouch. Inside it was a cassette tape. Back in her car, hands shaking, she popped the cassette into an old player she'd brought just in case. Static filled the speakers, followed by a faint voice. A woman's voice. Linda's. She sounded frightened, whispering as if someone could hear her. "If something happens to me, look into Denton. Both of them. I found something. In the storage unit behind the old Marine station. Locker 12. I think it's big." Rachel's eyes welled with tears. It was the first time she'd heard her sister's voice in over a decade. But more than that, it was proof. Linda knew she was in danger. And she'd left a clue. A place. A locker. The old Marine station had been closed since the late 80s. Abandoned. Fenced off and scheduled for demolition. But Rachel found a way in. The storage lockers were still there, rusted and weather-worn. She counted them one by one, her heart pounding as she approached locker 12. The padlock had been cut. Recently. The door hung slightly open. Inside was nothing. Empty. Just dust and rust. Someone had gotten there first. Rachel stood in the silence, heart sinking, knowing she was close, so close, but still chasing shadows. Someone was still trying to cover this up. Someone who had been watching for years. She knew now that Linda had uncovered something dangerous, something that involved law enforcement and possibly went far beyond Pacific Grove. But the evidence was scattered, buried, and fading fast. And yet, pieces remained. The photo, the notebook, the voice on the tape. Enough to show that Linda's disappearance wasn't random. It wasn't an accident. And it wasn't a simple case of falling off a cliff. She had found something. She had been silenced. But Rachel wasn't going to stop. Not now. Not when she was closer than ever. As she stood in that dusty old storage room, one final detail caught her eye, scratched into the metal wall behind where the locker had stood. A single word, etched by hand. Witness. And someone, somewhere, knew exactly what that meant. Rachel couldn't stop thinking about the word she saw scratched into the back of that empty locker. Witness. It wasn't there by accident. Whoever had carved it meant for someone to find it. But carved by who? Linda? Or someone else? And if Linda had seen something, something she wasn't supposed to, who had she told? Had she been planning to testify? Or had she been recording evidence for herself, knowing that no one else would believe her unless she had proof? That word echoed in Rachel's head for days. It confirmed what she had long feared. Linda didn't just disappear. She was silenced. And now, all these years later, someone was still working hard to keep the truth buried. Rachel began retracing every place Linda had been in her final weeks. She spoke to her sister's old co-workers, old friends, even her former landlord. Most gave vague answers or said they didn't remember much. But one woman, Ellen, who had worked the front desk at the police station in 1977, agreed to meet with Rachel. They sat across from each other in a quiet cafe just outside town. Ellen looked nervous, constantly checking the windows, sipping her tea like it might cool her nerves. "I remember Linda," she said, voice low. She was smart, always asking questions, always digging deeper than she needed to. Some of the guys didn't like that. Rachel pressed gently, asking if Linda ever talked about being afraid or feeling like someone was following her. Ellen nodded. One night, she stayed after her shift, said she was going to look at old case files. I left before she did, but the next morning, I found a note she left on my desk. It said, "Ellen, if anyone asks, tell them I went home at 10. Thanks." That was a red flag. Linda had lied about her whereabouts that night. She didn't want it known that she had stayed late. What files had she looked at? And why had she asked Ellen to cover for her? When Rachel asked if the note still existed, Ellen shook her head. "I didn't keep it. I thought it was just about a personal issue or something. But now, I wonder." Rachel left the cafe feeling more frustrated than ever. There were pieces everywhere, but they still didn't fit together. Then she remembered something from the old notebook recovered from the car. One entry mentioned a unit storage lock. It had been scribbled with an address near the Pacific Grove Marina. She decided to check it out, even though the building it referenced had been converted into a bait shop years ago. She parked her car and walked toward the back of the building. There was a rusted metal door partially hidden behind a stack of lobster traps. It wasn't locked. Inside was a small, forgotten room filled with old cabinets and dusty records. Most of the folders were useless: boat permits, marina work orders, fishing licenses. But in the bottom drawer, tucked behind a stack of water-damaged files, Rachel found a thin folder marked confidential. OP-7 Decommission Review. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were just a few pages, but they were explosive. The documents outlined a small, unsanctioned unit formed in 1975, reportedly designed to monitor internal threats and investigate officers suspected of compromising law enforcement integrity. But the wording was vague, almost like it had been scrubbed. There were no officer names, no signatures, just a list of case numbers and redacted locations. One number stood out to Rachel: 34-77, PG, Pacific Grove, 1977. Linda's case year. She took photos of the papers and left quickly, heart pounding. That night, she called one of the private investigators she'd worked with before, a man named Leo, ex-FBI. She sent him the photos. An hour later, he called her back. "You're sitting on something serious," he said. "This OP-7 thing? It was real. There were whispers about it in the late 70s. Unofficial surveillance. Targeted intimidation. Some agents said it was created to keep certain people in line. Whistleblowers, mostly. And if your sister's case is linked to one of those files, that means someone saw her as a threat. Rachel was quiet for a moment, staring out the window at the fog creeping up the street. So they killed her to shut her up? She asked. Leo sighed. I don't know. But someone wanted her gone. And if OP7 had anything to do with it, then it goes way beyond Pacific Grove. Meanwhile, the current Pacific Grove Police Department had started to feel the pressure. Media interest in Linda's case had reignited after news of the submerged car and the mystery photo broke. Reporters were showing up at city council meetings. Locals were asking questions. But the department stayed silent. That only made the whispers louder. Online forums were full of theories. Some claimed Linda had discovered evidence of a secret operation. Others suggested a cover-up involving multiple agencies. A few pointed fingers at the Denton brothers, calling them ghost cops who left a trail of shadows. While the public speculated, Rachel kept digging. She got a call from a woman in San Diego who claimed to have once lived next door to James Denton in the early 80s. Her name was Sandra, and she said she remembered something strange, how Denton would go on long drives at night and sometimes return with packages he'd lock away in his garage. One time, she said, I asked him what he did for work. He smiled and said, I keep people quiet. I thought he was joking. But after your sister's case hit the news again, I started wondering. Rachel asked if Sandra had ever been in the garage. She hadn't, but she remembered something else. A box labeled Marine Station 12. That was the same label Linda had mentioned on the cassette tape. Rachel's heart dropped. If Denton had kept something from the Marine Station, maybe it wasn't destroyed after all. Maybe it had just been moved. Rachel asked for the address and drove to San Diego the next day. The house was still there, but a new family lived in it. When she explained the situation, the current homeowner let her see the garage. Most of it had been cleared out, but in a crawlspace behind an old water heater, she found a broken lockbox. Empty, but inside was a faded shipping label. The address? A storage facility in Bakersfield. It was becoming clear now. Someone had been moving the evidence around for years, staying one step ahead. But they had slipped up. Rachel called Leo and asked him to meet her in Bakersfield. Together, they located the storage facility and requested access to the unit listed on the label. The manager hesitated, said the unit had been empty for over a decade. But when they asked to inspect it anyway, he finally agreed. Inside, the room was nearly bare. But in the corner, behind a piece of broken drywall, was a small metal lockbox. Inside were several cassette tapes, another badge, and a handwritten letter addressed to R.M. Rachel Morgan. She opened the letter with shaking hands. It was signed only with the initials, L.M. The writing was rushed, panicked, but clear. It said, They're watching. I don't know how much time I have. If you're reading this, then they found me. But don't trust the ones in uniform, not all of them. I found something in the case files from Santa Cruz. A missing girl. Same MO, tied to the Denton brothers. They're using the badge to protect themselves. Don't let this die with me. Rachel sat down on the concrete floor, overwhelmed. Every instinct told her she was getting too close. But it also confirmed something she'd known in her gut all along. Linda had tried to expose them. She'd risked everything, left breadcrumbs behind for someone to follow. And now, all these years later, Rachel was the one picking them up. But even now, with pieces of the truth in her hands, Rachel knew she wasn't safe. A black SUV had been following her on the drive down. She'd seen it in the side mirror more than once. It hadn't made a move yet, but the message was clear. Keep going, and you might end up like your sister. But Rachel wasn't backing down. Not now. Not after everything. She looked over at Leo. This goes further than I thought. Leo nodded, grim. And we're not the only ones who know now. And somewhere, someone was watching, realizing that the truth they buried was starting to rise back to the surface. Rachel didn't sleep that night. Not even for a minute. The letter, the tapes, the badge, they sat in front of her on the motel bed like sacred artifacts. Each piece screamed proof, but also danger. And that SUV she kept seeing in her rearview mirror? It was more than just paranoia now. Someone was watching her. She could feel it, a kind of pressure that followed her from room to room. even when she was alone. She pulled the curtains tight and stuffed towels at the base of the door. Her phone buzzed once. Unknown number. No message. Leo offered to stay the night in the room next door. He didn't say much, but she could tell he was on edge too. A man like him didn't rattle easy, but something about this whole thing had unsettled him. Maybe it was the scope of it. Maybe it was how personal it had become. Either way, he kept his gun on the nightstand, loaded and ready. The next morning, Rachel made copies of everything: photos of the letter, digital backups of the cassette recordings, scans of the fake badge, and uploaded them to a secure cloud drive. She sent encrypted links to 2 people she trusted. One was a journalist she'd worked with before, someone who'd been quietly following her progress. The other was a former prosecutor she met early in the case, now retired but still with deep connections in the justice system. She added a note to both: "If something happens to me, release everything." The pressure was mounting. Too many people knew too little, and those who knew too much were disappearing. She had no doubt that what Linda found back in 1977 was part of something systemic, something meant to stay buried. And the Denton brothers? They were just the first layer. There were others. People who helped hide what happened. People still walking free. Rachel and Leo headed to Santa Cruz next. That's where the connection to the other missing girl came from, the one Linda mentioned in her final note. Rachel had spent the drive combing through old news archives and found it. A 17-year-old named Aaron Valdez, reported missing in August 1976. No foul play was ever declared. Official stories said she ran away. But in a local paper, Rachel found something curious. A quote from an anonymous source saying Aaron had been scared for her life days before she vanished. The paper never followed up. The case was closed. They drove to the address Aaron used to live at, a now empty lot overrun with weeds and broken fencing. But the neighbor, an older man named Kurt, still lived next door. Rachel introduced herself and explained why she was there. At first, he was reluctant, but when she showed him Linda's picture, something changed in his expression. "I saw her once," he said. "Your sister. She came here about a week before Aaron disappeared. Asked questions. Had a badge. I didn't think anything of it back then." Rachel's heart skipped. Linda had been there. She had known Aaron's disappearance was connected to something bigger. "Did Aaron say anything to you?" she asked. Kurt looked down, hesitant. "She told me someone from law enforcement had been harassing her. Not from our town. Said he wore a badge, but never gave a name. She was afraid to go to the police because she thought they were in on it." Rachel swallowed hard. "Did she describe him?" "Tall. Dark hair. Drove a green Chevy. Always wore gloves." Rachel exchanged a glance with Leo. It was consistent with descriptions of James Denton from back then. That night, Rachel and Leo went through the tapes found in the storage unit. Most were poor quality, recorded in hushed tones, but one stood out. It was a conversation between Linda and a second person, possibly Aaron. The voice was faint, shaking. "He said if I told anyone, no one would believe me. That he'd ruin my family. But I saw what he did. I saw the car. There was blood." Rachel paused the tape. This is huge. This could be what Linda was going to use. She was going to blow this wide open." Leo leaned back, rubbing his face. And then she vanished. The implications were crushing. Not just for Linda, not just for Aaron, but for anyone who had crossed paths with that shadow operation. OP-7 wasn't just about watching other officers. It was about control, fear, silencing people who got too close. And now Rachel was right in the middle of it. The tension ratcheted even higher when they returned to the motel the next day to find Rachel's room had been broken into. Nothing was stolen, but everything had been gone through. Her laptop, her notes, her bag, all touched. Someone had been inside and wanted her to know it. There were no fingerprints. No cameras had caught anything. But a single item had been left behind on the bed. A photo. It was of Rachel, taken just hours earlier, standing outside Aaron's old house. She stared at it, breath caught in her chest. "They're watching everything," she said. Leo nodded grimly. "And they're not trying to hide it anymore." They moved to a safer location that night. A friend of Leo's in Monterey with a secure home and surveillance. Rachel stayed awake going through the OP-7 documents again, scanning them for anything that would tell her who else was involved. She found repeated references to Asset A-17 and Clearance G Delta. It was clear there was a chain of command. Linda must have known more than she shared in her notes. The plan now was simple. Rachel needed to find out who signed off on OP-7, who had the authority to create it and shut it down. That meant getting into the original city and county records, ones that hadn't been digitized. The archives were deep in the basement of the old city hall in Pacific Grove. Restricted, but not impenetrable. She and Leo went in during open hours, pretending to be researchers working on a historical report. The clerk barely looked up as they made their way into the lower levels. There, behind rows of crumbling files and half-collapsed shelves, they found a small section labeled Special Committees 1970 to 1985. Inside was a dusty binder marked Cross-Agency Liaison, Joint Operation Reviews. And there it was, a memo dated May 1976. Subject, OP-7 Personnel Assignment. Signed by Chief Harold Denton. And beneath that, 3 additional signatures. One of them was from a deputy district attorney who later went on to become a state judge. Another belonged to a now-retired senator. The third was initials only. Mr. Rachel stared at the page, her heart racing. This wasn't just a local thing. This was connected to higher levels. People who had moved on, climbed up, and left no trace. People with power. She took a photo of the page and quickly returned the binder to its spot. As she turned to leave, she noticed something else tucked inside a folder nearby. A list of internal investigations from the same year. Linda's name was there, but not as a complainant. She was listed as a subject. The note said she had accessed restricted files and may be attempting to compromise operational security. They'd labeled her a threat. Suddenly, it all clicked. Linda hadn't just stumbled onto something. She'd been digging into it, pushing too hard, and they turned the tables on her. Painted her as the problem, gave themselves justification to act. Rachel left the archive with a storm in her chest. Everything was clearer now, and more dangerous than ever. The same system that had buried Linda was still protecting those responsible. And now Rachel was holding the matches that could burn it all down. But she didn't know who to trust. Not the police. Not the courts. Maybe not even the press. Whoever had been following her was still out there, and they knew she was getting close. That night, back at the safe house, Rachel heard something outside. Gravel crunching. A figure by the fence. She peered through the curtain and saw the same black SUV parked just down the block. Waiting. Watching. Leo walked in, saw her face, and looked out the window. "We're almost at the end," he said quietly. "One more piece. Then we bring it all forward." Rachel nodded, jaw tight. But they know that too. The wind howled outside. A storm was coming. And with it, the truth raw, dangerous, and long overdue. Rachel barely breathed as she stood by the window, watching the black SUV idle just down the block. Its headlights were off, but the soft hum of the engine buzzed like a warning. Leo had already drawn the blinds and double-checked the back door. "They're not going to make a move tonight," he said, trying to sound confident. "They want to scare you into backing off." But Rachel knew it wasn't just intimidation anymore. The closer she got, the bolder they became. And now, with the proof she had collected, documents, tapes, and that signature from Harold Denton, the people protecting the secret were growing desperate. Still, she hadn't expected what came next. It was 2:47 a.m. when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick it up. There was silence on the other end. Then a voice, female, hoarse, like someone who hadn't spoken in years. "Stop asking questions, Rachel," it said. "You're digging up ghosts that were meant to stay buried." Before she could respond, the line went dead. Rachel stood frozen. The voice was hauntingly familiar, but distorted enough that she couldn't place it. She looked at Leo. "It was a woman," she whispered. "She knew my name." Leo grabbed his laptop and started tracing the call. Blocked number. Routed through 2 different out-of-state towers. Whoever she is, she doesn't want to be found. But Rachel couldn't shake it. The voice, it wasn't a threat. Not exactly. It sounded almost sad. That morning, as the sun finally broke through the coastal fog, Rachel got another surprise. A letter had been slid under the door. It was unmarked, folded twice, and inside was a photocopy of a page from a psychiatric file. The name at the top, Linda Morgan. Rachel's knees gave out, and she sank to the floor. The file claimed Linda had been seen by a department-recommended therapist just weeks before her disappearance. The notes were chilling. Phrases like increasing paranoia, delusional thinking, and believe she is being followed by fellow officers were scribbled in the margins. One sentence stood out. Patient may be creating fictional narratives around real cases. Recommending leave of absence. Rachel had never heard anything about her sister seeing a therapist. And it didn't make sense. Linda was sharp, focused, never prone to fantasy. But reading the report, it was clear someone had tried to discredit her. If she disappeared, and this file surfaced, people would believe she was mentally unstable. It was a setup. Leo looked over the document and shook his head. This wasn't therapy. This was containment. They needed a record to make her unreliable, in case she ever came forward. And just like that, a new angle emerged: character assassination. If OP7 had used mental health claims to silence whistleblowers, how many others had they erased this way? Rachel started going through cold cases again. Young officers, journalists, civilian witnesses. And sure enough, she found at least 3 other individuals from the mid-70s to early 80s marked as psychological risks. 2 had vanished. 1 was found dead in an alleged accident. All of them had ties to OP7 investigations. As Rachel built out a map on the wall of Leo's safe house, connecting names, dates, and locations with red string and scribbled notes, a pattern began to form. But one detail stood out, one that didn't fit. A name that had appeared in 2 different places, years apart. Mira Ralston. In 1976, she was listed as a court transcriptionist during an internal affairs review. In 1989, she was registered as a Witness Protection Program supervisor for the U.S. Marshals. Rachel tracked down the last known address and found something she didn't expect. Mira was alive, and she lived just 45 minutes outside Sacramento. Leo warned her it could be a trap, but Rachel had a feeling. If anyone knew what had really happened, it might be this woman, this ghost hiding in plain sight. They drove out the next morning. A quiet farmhouse surrounded by fields. Mira answered the door herself. Thin, silver-haired, eyes sharp but cautious. Rachel introduced herself, holding out Linda's photo. She was my sister, she said. I think you knew something about her case. For a long moment, Mira said nothing. Then, quietly, she opened the door. They sat in her small kitchen, the clock ticking loud above the stove. Mira made tea, her hands trembling. I shouldn't be talking to you, she said. I made promises, signed papers, but I knew this day would come. Rachel leaned in. Did you know Linda? Mira nodded. Not directly, but I handled one of the transcripts from her review. The department buried it, claimed she was unstable, obsessed with fabricated connections. But that wasn't what I heard on the tapes. She was clear. She mentioned Denton. OP7, the Valdez girl. And she said something else, something I never forgot. Rachel held her breath. She said she had evidence. But if anything happened to her, someone would come looking. That her story wouldn't end with her. Rachel felt her throat tighten. She meant me. Mira reached for a box from a high shelf and opened it. Inside were old cassette reels, photos, and typed pages. They erased her from the system, she said. But I kept this. I wasn't brave enough back then. I am now. Rachel flipped through the files. There were interviews Linda had done, police memos that contradicted public statements, even an internal report that claimed OP7 had been ordered to dissolve, signed by the same judge now serving on the state court. They had faked the shutdown. The operation had gone underground, not away. Leo scanned the documents and froze. This page here. It's a transfer request. Denton wasn't acting alone. He was reporting to someone under the code named Sparrowhawk. Rachel stared at the paper. Who is that? Mira looked away. I don't know, but there were rumors. Sparrowhawk wasn't local. He was federal, tied to intelligence circles. Deep state. The air in the room felt heavier now. If OP7 had backing beyond the state level, then they were up against something much bigger than they thought. That evening, as they left Myra's house with a copy of the files, Rachel got another call. Unknown number again. But this time, the voice on the other end wasn't threatening. It was panicked. I know what you're doing, the man said quickly. I don't have much time. They're coming for me. Meet me at Cliffside Point, sunrise. Then a click. Silence. Leo frowned. Cliffside Point? That's where they found your sister's patrol car. Rachel nodded, pulse racing. This can't be a coincidence. The next morning, long before the sun rose, they drove to Cliffside Point. The cliffs were quiet, the ocean below crashing against the rocks in a slow, rhythmic warning. They waited near the old observation deck, eyes scanning the horizon. Minutes passed. Then a figure approached from the shadows. Tall, thin, nervous. He looked around constantly, clutching something wrapped in a towel. As he got closer, Rachel saw his face, recognizable from old press photos. It was Officer Peter Larson, one of Linda's old colleagues. He looked haunted. I kept my mouth shut for years, he whispered. But I saw what they did. I was there the night she disappeared. She didn't die in that car. She never went over the edge. Rachel's heart stopped. Then what happened? She asked. Larson looked over his shoulder. They took her. Put her in black transport. She was alive. Terrified. I heard them say she was going to Facility Echo. Somewhere remote. Off books. Rachel stepped closer. Where is it? He shook his head. I don't know. But I stole this. He handed her the towel. Inside was a small flash drive and a manila envelope. Then headlights appeared in the distance. Larson froze. They found me. Rachel grabbed the items and turned to run, Leo pulling her with him. But before they could get far, a sound cracked through the morning air. A shot. Larson dropped. Rachel screamed, ducking behind the rocks as Leo pulled his weapon. They scrambled back toward the car, heart pounding, the envelope clutched in her hands. Whatever was on that flash drive, someone was willing to kill for it. And now, with every second, the truth came closer, but so did the danger. The real story was almost within reach, but not without one final cost. The car tore down the coastal road as the sky behind them turned a dull orange. Rachel didn't speak. She couldn't. Her hands trembled around the envelope, still clutching it like it might vanish. Leo drove in silence, eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. The black SUV that had haunted them for weeks didn't follow, but the damage was already done. Officer Larson was gone. And now, whatever he'd died to give them, this tiny flash drive, held the last piece of the story. They didn't risk going home. Leo had a safe house further inland, tucked behind an old barn where cell signals didn't reach and no one could listen. By the time they arrived, the sun was high. Rachel didn't waste time. She inserted the flash drive into Leo's laptop, and they waited as the files loaded. At first, it was just names. Long lists of people. Some with notes, non-compliant, redirected, terminated. Rachel felt her chest tighten. These weren't criminals. Many were police officers, journalists, lawyers, even a few medical workers. All linked to cases that had intersected OP7. All silenced in some way. And then came the folder labeled Echo. Rachel clicked it open and gasped. There were video clips. Surveillance footage. Old, grainy, timestamped between 1976 and 1990. Some were inside stark white rooms, sterile spaces with no windows. In several clips, Rachel saw people strapped to chairs, questioned for hours. Some were sedated. Others simply stared into space, unblinking. One file was labeled LM77. She clicked it, and there she was. Linda. Alive. Rachel's heart stopped as she watched the short video. Her sister sat on a metal bench, hands folded tightly in her lap. She looked older, thinner, like the life had been drained from her, but she was alive. She spoke softly, barely above a whisper. I didn't make anything up, she said to someone off camera. It was real. Denton was covering for Sparrowhawk. The girl, Elena, she was supposed to testify, but they killed her. I was going to bring it forward. The voice off-screen asked, Where are the tapes? Linda didn't answer. She just stared down at her hands. The video cut off suddenly. Rachel wiped her eyes. The date stamp showed the footage was from March 1981, 4 years after her sister was declared dead. I was right, she whispered. They kept her alive. They tried to break her. Leo leaned back, stunned. Echo, it wasn't just a code. It was a facility. A black site. Rachel scanned the files for coordinates. Finally, she found a set in the metadata of a logistics folder. Remote. Somewhere deep in the Sierra Nevada. There was a note beside it. Site decommissioned 1992. Transferred to Vault Omega. Rachel and Leo stared at each other. If Vault Omega exists, Leo said, we're not just dealing with state secrets anymore. This goes higher. Federal. Maybe international. But Rachel shook her head. I don't care. I'm going. If there's even a chance she's still alive, Leo hesitated, then nodded. We go together. They packed what they needed and left under cover of dusk. The road to the Sierra site wasn't marked. They had to hike the last few miles through thick forest, guided only by GPS and a decades-old map from Myra's files. When they finally reached it, Rachel wasn't sure what she expected, an abandoned military base, maybe, or a rusted gate. Instead, they found a concrete hatch buried in the forest floor. No markings. No sign of life. Just a keypad. Leo studied the control panel. Looks biometric. But maybe the override code in the files he typed in a sequence. A low click sounded, followed by the slow hiss of hydraulics. The hatch opened. They climbed down carefully. The tunnel was dark, the air cold and stale. Flashlights cut through the black, revealing faded signs: Sector A, Observation, Medical. Most rooms were empty now, their contents gutted or broken. But down one hall, a single red light still blinked on an old server panel. Leo hooked in his device and downloaded everything. And then Rachel saw it, another video. Dated 1992, the last year the facility was used. Linda was there again. She looked different, calmer. She spoke directly to the camera this time. If anyone finds this, I want you to know, I didn't give up. I remembered who I was. I remembered the truth. They said no one would come for me. But I believe someone will. I believe in you. Rachel covered her mouth, tears running down her face. She knew, she whispered. She left this for me. But the final log on the server chilled her. It was short, just one line. Transfer LM 77 to Omega Transport, ETA 0400 hours. Status, Code Violet. Leo looked at her. Code Violet. That means high threat. They still saw her as a danger. Rachel stepped back. So they didn't kill her. They moved her again. Vault Omega. But where was it? That night, they returned to the surface, the weight of the truth pressing heavy on their shoulders. They had enough evidence now. Files, video, names. It was everything the department, Denton, and this mysterious Sparrowhawk figure had tried to bury. But just as they reached the car, Rachel's phone buzzed. A message. No name. It read, "You've gone far enough. Go public and she dies." Attached was a photo. Linda, older now, gray hair, eyes tired, sitting in a dim room that looked very much alive. The timestamp? 2 days ago. Rachel's hands trembled. She's still alive. They're still watching her. Leo gritted his teeth. They let you find Echo. On purpose. They wanted you to think it ended there. They baited me, Rachel said slowly. They used Larson. Used Mira. Even the flash drive, it was a setup. They needed to know how close I'd get. And then, another realization hit her like a blow. What if Sparrowhawk isn't a he, she asked. What if it's someone I already know? Her mind raced back through every connection, every interview, every lead, and then it clicked. A name that had popped up again and again. Not a suspect, not a villain. Deputy Commissioner Elaine Monroe. She had been helpful, supportive, but she was also there in 1977. She had access to the internal reviews. She rose through the ranks just as OP-7 dissolved, and she never appeared on any of the whistleblower lists. Rachel remembered the dinner she had at Monroe's house 2 months ago. The way she asked questions, not too much, not too little. The way she always made sure Rachel felt supported. She was guiding me, Rachel said aloud. Not helping. Guiding. Leo's eyes narrowed. You think she's Sparrowhawk? I think she's been running Omega for years. They had one option left. Go public, or go after Monroe. Rachel chose both. They drove straight to a trusted reporter Rachel had worked with before. Together, they prepared the files, blurred the footage, protected identities where needed. The story would break globally in under 24 hours. But before they hit publish, Rachel sent one last message. She used Monroe's private line, found deep in the server metadata. It was a gamble, but she sent the footage of Linda, the logs, everything. Her message was simple. You want to negotiate? Let's talk. You have 12 hours. For a long time, nothing came. Then her phone rang. Monroe. Her voice was calm, cold. You're a lot like her, she said. Stubborn, brave, naive. Rachel replied, You're scared. There was silence. Then Monroe said, She's not where you think she is. But I'll make you a deal. Drop the broadcast. Come alone. I'll take you to her. Rachel met Monroe that night on a helipad outside the city. She left Leo behind, despite his protests. The risk was hers to take. Monroe arrived in a sleek black chopper. She looked exactly the same, elegant, composed, unreadable. You'll never see her again after this, Monroe warned. But you'll know the truth. Rachel boarded the chopper. They flew in silence. An hour later, deep in the desert, they landed near an unmarked compound. And there, behind reinforced glass, Rachel saw her sister. Alive. Older. Weaker. But her. Rachel ran to the window. Linda turned slowly, eyes widening. Recognition. Tears. A guard stepped forward, but Monroe raised a hand. 5 minutes. Rachel didn't waste a second. I found you, she said through the glass. I'm getting you out. Linda pressed a hand to the window. You already did. And then the lights in the room flickered. Sirens blared. Monroe cursed, pulling out a phone. Rachel turned. What's happening? But Monroe didn't answer. She ran toward the chopper. Rachel followed and saw Leo standing on a nearby ridge, phone in hand. Live broadcast. He leaked everything. Too late to stop it. Monroe turned to Rachel. You'll regret this. And then the facility shook. Back inside, Linda was gone. Vanished. Rachel screamed her name. But the window was dark again. And the story wasn't over. The desert wind howled as Rachel stood frozen by the helipad, staring into the darkness where her sister had just been. The explosion hadn't reached the compound itself, but the sudden power loss and Monroe's rushed exit made one thing painfully clear. This was never going to be easy. Linda was alive. Rachel had seen her. But she was still a prisoner, and now everything was in chaos. Leo ran up moments later, out of breath, his face pale. The story's out, he said. It's everywhere. News stations picked it up already. Your sister's face, the tapes, the documents, people are asking questions. Rachel nodded slowly, her heart heavy but also strangely calm. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, she wasn't chasing shadows anymore. The truth was no longer buried. And even if Linda wasn't in her arms yet, she wasn't lost either. Over the next several days, the story dominated the news. Investigations were launched into the Vault Omega program. Officials who once dismissed Rachel's questions now found themselves under scrutiny. Deputy Commissioner Elaine Monroe resigned without a statement, her whereabouts unknown. Some speculated she had fled the country. Others whispered she had been quietly detained. No one could confirm it. Meanwhile, protests sparked outside government buildings, demanding accountability. Families of missing officers from the late 70s and 80s reached out to Rachel. Many shared similar stories, relatives who vanished under suspicious circumstances, always tied somehow to law enforcement or classified cases. Rachel was invited to speak at a public inquiry. She stood before a packed hearing room, the weight of her journey pressing on her shoulders. But she spoke clearly and calmly. She told them about Linda, about Opie, 7, Echo, and Vault Omega. She played the clips softened, redacted, but undeniable. She spoke not just as a detective or a sister, but as someone who had seen what unchecked power could do when left in the dark for too long. Leo helped sort the mountain of leads that came in. Some turned out to be dead ends. Others helped fill in gaps, connections between missing persons reports, mysterious departmental retirements, and whistleblowers whose voices had been silenced. Together, they built a timeline that stretched from 1977 to the present day, a tangled web of deception, secrets, and quiet resistance. But through it all, one question remained unanswered. Where was Linda now? The footage from the facility showed her just moments before the power cut. And then nothing. No backup feed, no camera angles, no GPS logs. Vault Omega had lived up to its myth. Even exposed, it still held its secrets tightly. Rachel refused to give up. Weeks passed. Then a letter arrived at Leo's safe house, handwritten, with no return address. Inside was a single photograph. Linda again, standing in front of a small seaside cottage. Her hair shorter, her expression softer. She looked free. On the back was a note. Don't look for me. You did enough. I remember everything now. Live your life, Rachel. For both of us. Rachel sat with the letter in her lap for a long time. The handwriting was unmistakable. The picture had a date scribbled in the corner, just 5 days prior. She believed it. Linda had finally escaped. Maybe with help, maybe on her own. Maybe Vault Omega had crumbled in the face of exposure. Or maybe Monroe had one last act of mercy left in her. Rachel didn't know. And for once, she didn't need to. She folded the photo and slipped it into her wallet. In the weeks that followed, she stepped away from the department. There were offers for interviews, documentaries, even book deals. But Rachel turned them down. She wasn't interested in being a face on TV. She wanted peace. She wanted to breathe again. She took long walks, visited the places she and Linda used to talk about when they were kids. Simple, quiet things. She stayed close to Leo, who had become more than a partner in this mission. He was family now. They both bore scars from this journey, but they had also found a kind of healing in it. The city, meanwhile, slowly changed. New reforms were introduced. Investigative units were reshaped with more oversight. OP7's name was scrubbed from any future operations, and every related case file was open to the public. It didn't fix everything, but it was a start. One evening, Rachel sat at the edge of an ocean cliff, the same kind Linda had supposedly driven off all those years ago. The sun was setting, the waves crashing far below. She took out the photo again. Linda's face smiled back at her, calm and free. She thought about everything they had been through, everything they'd lost and fought to regain. For years, she'd been chasing answers, haunted by questions and guilt. But now, in this quiet moment, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Closure. Maybe Linda would reach out again someday. Maybe she wouldn't. But Rachel knew her sister was alive and free, and that was enough. The wind picked up, tugging gently at her coat. She stood up, watching the last sliver of sun dip below the horizon. She whispered, "We made it, Linda." Behind her, the world was still spinning. But for the first time, Rachel didn't need to run after it. She was already exactly where she needed to be. And so, the story of Officer Linda Matthews, lost in 1977 and rediscovered not just in files or footage, but in truth, came to a close. A story about justice, about memory, about how some voices, no matter how long they are silenced, still find their way back to the light. The ocean roared below, endless and steady, as Rachel turned and walked away. Not as a detective chasing ghosts anymore, but as a sister finally at peace. And the waves, like echoes, carried the rest of the story far out into the deep.